Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Revamped Founder. In this episode, we have Dereck Paul joining us. Dereck is the co-founder and CEO of Glass Health, which is helping clinicians in making decisions regarding patients with the help and the power of AI. They recently made out of the Y Combinator Winter 23 batch, which had an acceptance rate of less than 2%. So they're sure on to something really big. In this episode, we talk about what Y Combinator is, how does Y Combinator really work, how did they get accepted in Y Combinator with such acceptance rates. Apart from this, we also talk about what it is like building a healthcare startup. What does the current healthcare scenario look like? What role does AI play in it? And how will it grow in the future? And so much more. This is an incredible episode. Do listen to it till the very end.
Oh, hey Derek, how are you? I hope you're doing well.
Hi, Advik. I'm doing well. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me. Sure.
When did you get into glass? I want to know a little bit of background about how you got into it from medical school.
Yeah. So for me, I was thinking about building a company and building companies in general before medical school when I was a pre-med. Um, I really had some great professors at Hopkins who were medical device inventors and had also done some drug discovery that were sort of pharmaceuticals. So I actually had professors who had, either discovered a molecule or had created a ultrasound device or something like that and brought it to market, and were both professors and own their companies. And so early on, I sort of saw building a company was another way to have impact in medicine alongside some of the traditional paths of research and public health. So I applied to YC now 7 years ago and didn't get in as a pre-medical student. Ended up going to medical school and then later on starting a completely different company that is now Glass Health. And um, Glass has been such a great experience. I met my co-founder, Graham Ramsey, who's an engineer in when I was in medical school. We talked about the company for a little while. And then founded it in 2021.
So you applied to Y Combinator 7 years ago. What do you think changed from then since now?
Honestly, I think I understand the larger picture of incentives across the tech ecosystem. I think when I first applied, I was like, hey, I have this idea. And if this idea works, it could be really cool, right? Which is often how it starts. I think what I learned along the way was that the way the investors think are, is this the right moment for a new technology that can create a really big business? And so it was a little bit less about like, you have to kind of get out of your head about the technology being nifty or being really cool, or being your invention, and get into the head of, does this really solve a problem for people? And is it solving a problem for enough people at a price that for enough people at a price that they'll pay for? And the combination of that number of people and the price leads to a really big company. That wasn't how I was thinking when I was a pre-med, but I think by the time we applied to YC last year, we had kind of brought a focus on both the technology and the business together, and that is part of what I think our success was.
And what caused this learning to instill in your mind?
Really just running up against not getting funded, running up against things not working. So, I tried to start a company when I was kind of making that transition from pre-med to medical school. I worked very briefly as chief of staff at a YC-backed company, which gave me a little bit more insight into how operations work. And then when Graham and I started Glass, we really struggled to first find a product that people really wanted, and then struggled a little bit with our first getting funding for the company. And so really, I think it's almost like running up against the wall, right? like my answer to like what changed is that like I failed a lot, right? I was just many years of it not working and making these mistakes and getting feedback from other people that kind of led to a more mature way of looking at okay, what's our company doing and how do we fit into the ecosystem of venture capital, but also where do we sit in the market landscape in terms of other companies in our space who are doing things. And that just, for me, took a while. You'll be faster.
Yeah, that's a great point. But why YC? Why not angels? Why not pre-seed funds, seed funds? Why Combinator in general? And like, what is Y Combinator for the people who might not?
Yeah. So Y Combinator is an accelerator program where you work intensively with the Y Combinator partners for 3 months, and then you have a demo day where you usually raise your seed round. So it's for early stage companies, although sometimes later stage companies do it. And I would say that like, well, certainly as a track record, YC is the most successful early stage investors around the world, right? If you would compare the returns from any seed fund, and they were some of the first investors in Airbnb and Dropbox and Reddit and Instacart and Cruise. And so the, one piece of it is just they have a track record of incredible success in terms of launching companies. And so I think, when you're thinking about bringing an investor on, one piece of it is the money, but a lot of times you're kind of building the family that goes along with this company. So for me, I think the huge value in YC was not the cash at all. For us, it was the mentorship in terms of working with the partners, how they've seen, you've only seen your company, and maybe this is your second company, you've seen 2. They've seen thousands, right? So their mental models of how a company succeeds is much stronger than your mental model of how a company succeeds. So being able to get that kind of feedback as you're moving through things, really, really helpful. And then I think the next part is the network. So when you're part of YC, you get to meet the founders of some of these really successful companies, but you're also inside a digital network with them where you can ask for what you need, right? You can say, I need an intro to this person, or does anyone want to try this product? I need feedback on this. And so the network of founders is actually as valuable as access to the partners is accessing other YC founders. When you go to raise your next round, YC companies, because there is such a high track record of success, raise at much higher valuations. So you actually set yourself up for more financial success later on, at least from a financing perspective, because YC has already de-risked the company. A lot of companies pivot during YC. So they've taken a good hard look at your company. They've challenged you in terms of, do you really have product market fit or are on the way to it, and pushed you to pivot if needed to get to a product that you're really making something people want. So I think, for early stage companies, I've never really met a startup in the early stage where I didn't strongly recommend that they do YC if they got in. I think it's got really tremendous benefits.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so what is the difference between Y Combinator, which is an accelerator, and raising through a normal VC fund in general?
Yeah. Well, really, it's that most VC funds don't have structured mentorship or programming, right? You go to a VC firm and there'll be a partner who is the person who leads that deal. They evaluate you. They kind of convince the firm to invest in you. And then they'll be your point of contact. Maybe you meet with them a couple times a year, quarterly, and they'll try to help you when they can and solve problems for you. It's very different than what YC is. You go to YC every day, you have some sort of programming, or like not every day, but most of the days you'll have a class or something like that on some piece of startup kind of world. It's like almost like startup college or startup school. But there's not a tremendous amount of that. Actually, a lot of the YC knowledge is free online, so you can watch it right now. And they actually kind of expect you to just do that already. So it's not a lot of that. A lot more is about the coaching that happens about your specific company. So you meet with your partners, you set a 2-week goal, growth goal, and then you talk about what the obstacles are to that, and then you try to make it. And then when you don't make your goal, you have to tell the partners, but you also tell the other companies. So you're accountable internally to your progress and your success. And so you're being pushed really hard with a lot of supervision and a lot of help and resources. And that kind of happens over this time limited 3-month period while you're part of the active batch. So, going to a regular VC, it's really going to be, they write the check and then they'll meet with you, when you need help, which is a little bit different than this structured way of mentoring to folks.
Yeah, and it's an incredible point. So I think I jump here a little bit in the same YC part also. Let's do a little story time from the time you guys applied to the 3 months when the 3 months ended. How did the structure look like? What did you guys do at YC particularly?
Well, yeah.
Look like YC.
Yeah. Well, so first, I'm not even sure if I said this, but I'm the CEO of Glass Health, and we build a AI-assisted clinical decision support platform for doctors. So what that really means is that doctors can describe a patient, and we can do an analysis that suggests what the most likely causes of that presentation are. So a process called differential diagnosis, or kind of establishing what are the possibilities here. And then we can draft or suggest a clinical plan. So given the presentation, what are some good next steps in terms of diagnostic tests, and what could be some good next treatment steps? We really, Glass is not something that replaces provider judgment, but it is one that can augment it and help providers also navigate evidence-based clinical information better than they would through kind of the traditional static references. So in terms of what happened for us, we actually did a major pivot as we went through YC. When we applied to YC, we were building a product that we call Glass Notebook, which is kind of an Evernote for doctors. So you can think of it as a way to build your own external brain. You could put your approaches for if you're evaluating a patient in the emergency room, you could put your treatment plans. Once you know someone has a diagnosis of heart failure, what are you going to do? And so a lot of doctors were using that as their external brain, and they really loved it. And that's why we got into YC. When we were in YC, the kind of AI revolution that all of us have just lived through with the improvement in large language models was happening literally underneath us, right? Like we probably got into YC in October, and ChatGPT launched in November, I think. So our entire YC batch, it was like a massive revolution in large language models, and the banks were crashing. It was a very, very intense time, right? To be a startup. And what we started to do was to look at, okay, how can really fantastic large language models be used in our use case? And I think we realized kind of two things. One was that the large language model could be used for differential diagnosis, but because they gain emergent abilities, emergent clinical abilities by being shown more data. So, you'll see things about how GPT-4 can pass the United States medical licensing exam. That's an emergent sort of property of having seen as much of the internet as it has. And then on the other side, we realized their reasoning abilities mixed with those clinical abilities let them navigate clinical guidelines in a way that was really helpful. So you could actually have a large language model interact with clinical guidelines, retrieve information for the clinician, so that to save you that time of looking something up in a book or looking it up in an index. And so those are really pretty powerful tools that would serve our existing users. Our users who are using the Evernote product, what do they want to do? They want to be good diagnosticians. They want to be able to diagnose patients well. They want to be good doctors in terms of treatment. They wanted to give their patients the best possible treatment and have good outcomes. So instead of trying to solve that by giving them an external brain to build for themselves, we started to really build a brain that everyone could use and to try to interact with it via large language model.
Yeah. Awesome. So you guys got into YC, pivoted, and what does the part from getting the mentorship and towards getting the funding that you guys actually want or wish to have? How does that look like?
Well, so what happens for most YC companies is that they will raise a seed round at demo day or before it. So early on in YC, once you announce that you're a YC company, investors will start to reach out to you. You might start to keep in touch with some of them. And then what usually happens for most YC companies is they'll meet with a lot of investors in the same week. You might meet with 50 investors over a 2-week period. And that creates a lot of kind of heat where the investors are competing against each other to invest in your company. And as that happens, valuations go up, the amount that you're able to raise goes up. So it's really about, during the early parts of YC, you focus as much as you can on your product, building your product, shipping your product, and growing. And then towards the end of YC, you take all that growth that you've demonstrated and you meet with a lot of investors and you raise the best possible seed round that you can.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Though. Does YC itself also invest in companies? Very Combinator.
They do, and they always have. The amount that they invest has changed over the years, but right now they essentially invest $500,000 in your company.
Awesome, and the equity that they take in the company is negotiated, or is that fixed too?
It is part of it. It's both, actually. So none of it's negotiated, but what I'll say is that, and this is publicly available information on the YC webpage, and it may change over time, but generally a portion of the money that they give you converts to 7% of your company. And that's, I think, traditionally what YC has kind of taken. And then a smaller portion is an uncapped safe, which means that it will convert at a future valuation, right? So maybe your future valuation is, I mean, when you do your company, Advik, your company would be worth $1 billion, right, or more. So it would convert at that future next valuation.
Yeah.
After this year.
I think YC took forward or had a major role in initiating the concept of safes and convertible notes.
That's right.
Yeah, I think which a lot of firms and VC funds have taken that into consideration after YC.
Yep.
But yeah, that's incredible. So you got into YC. You did the 3-month period. After that, what was one thing the biggest thing which you learned, and we'll talk about how it progressed further from that.
I think the biggest thing that I learned was to be relentlessly focused on product market fit. So I think there's a lot of noise involved with startups and Silicon Valley. There's events to go to and networking events, and investors to meet and, people to talk to and things to do. And really the only thing that matters is, do people love your product? And do they love it so much they're willing to pay for it? And are there enough of those people who can help you turn that into a big business? That's all. Like literally all your other problems will get solved if you do that. And so I think the biggest thing that I learned was just to be like very, very relentlessly focused on the product, and if you are providing a really fantastic experience to the user, and really almost, don't work on anything other than that, because most other things are going to be a major distraction. So, and I think that was something I had a sense of going into YC, but it's something that they really, I think, really drilled in as we went through the program.
Awesome. Related to this exact point, I think I also thought about this a lot when reading about product market fits and stuff. So how does the goal of the company stay in touch with the product market fit? Because you guys, I'll take your example, you were creating Glass Notebook, but the goal of that company was different from Glass Health. So is building a company that goes into YC or becomes relatively successful because of the goal that it has, or the PMF that it has, product market fit?
So, well, I think the reason that companies get into YC is very rarely about what they're building. It's actually very rare. Usually companies get into YC because they have formidable and tenacious founders. So YC is looking at the founders and thinking, these folks are smart and they will figure their way out to a company that has great product market fit. So actually, like most companies that are entering YC, to my understanding, don't have product market fit, but generally have a concept of something they want to work towards, and then sort of make changes to do that. I think for our company, this question of then how do you know when you have it? There's actually different resources and theories out there about what does real product market fit look like. I think one of the things that I walked away with was it's when the thing that you're selling, you can't keep it on the shelves, right? You can't supply it fast enough. Things are breaking because you cannot meet the demand. So when the demand for your product is exceeding your supply, your servers are breaking, whatever the situation is, like that's how like you kind of have something, and where there's kind of great sustainable growth that's coming from that. So in some ways it's an oversimplification, but I think that's ultimately what you're looking for. And I think there's a lot of humility at YC about what will actually do that, right? It's not obvious. It's not obvious what products that, if you deliver them to the market, will result in product market fit in a great company. So I think there's a lot of humility, I think, to a certain extent, amongst both founders and the partners that I've worked with, that we don't know. To a certain extent, we are exploring to find out.
Yeah, but you find out, but where do you pivot? Like you were building glass notebook for Glass Health, or anything that a person builds in the same industry that they're building in. Is it important to pivot in the same industry, or can they pivot outside of that too?
You can totally pivot outside of your industry. In our situation, we were trying to, we actually had the same users and we were solving the same problem for them. But we found that building a digital notebook, was a good solution for the problem, but an AI assistant was a better solution for the problem. So same problem, same users. What really pivoted in our case was the approach or the technology and the product that we were trying to deliver to the user to solve their problem. But so in ours is a more gentle Ours is a more gentle pivot. But people pivot, people pivot drastically. And sometimes that leads to huge success.
And at what point did you guys decide to pivot? So you entered YC, what did the mentors actually tell you to do in order to pivot?
Well, so one thing about pivoting, I would say, is that a lot of it is about, is there a good fit between the founder and the problem? And then is there a good fit between the solution and the problem, right? That you're building. I think for me, I'm a physician by training. So we were, pretty dedicated to healthcare for sure. But also, I mean, our kind of origin story comes out of the difficulties of being a physician, both in trying to achieve clinical mastery, but also experiencing some of the burnout that clinicians face in our society. And this came to a really high point at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there was a deep connection to the user base and to the problems that they faced. So almost any kind of pivoting that we were going to do was going to be around that set of users and problems. I think what can sometimes happen to folks is there'll be a founder who sees an opportunity where they can make money, but they are not deeply passionate about that problem or have no connection or insight into that problem. And so they can kind of go over there and they end up not being as successful. And so a lot of pivots that I saw from friends who were in YC was away from an idea that they initially thought was good but didn't get traction towards an idea that maybe wasn't as flashy but was a better fit for them. That was like, yeah, I know this problem and I have a vision for the solution, and I'm hell-bent on making that happen. So the partners didn't give us very specific advice about, here, you should pivot and here's what to do. What they do is kind of create a culture where you're seeking that product market fit, you're measuring your growth, and when you see that you don't have it, you make aggressive changes, which sometimes can be a product improvement, sometimes can be a pivot.
They have created a good culture. What do you think is what you noticed? You were in YC for the 3-month period. What is different from their culture where you think others are kind of missing on?
I've never experienced another accelerator, so I have nothing to compare to. I will say, I think what I do have a comparison to is sort of YC compared to other fields like medicine, and education at a school, something like that. I think there's a culture of being extremely direct about feedback and about the truth of where your company is. And sort of that kind of like, no fluff way of thinking about things. And it is part of it. And I think really, 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 really wonderful. And then I think the second part is that there is an aggressiveness to how they approach problems. So they want the companies to be aggressive and to ship code and to understand their users at a high tempo, right? There's this high tempo-ness to YC. They don't want it to take, you can't be lackadaisical in how you approach it, right? And then I think maybe the last part of the culture that kind of stuck with me was really an extremely high standard of excellence. So when you are thinking about what kind of company you want to build, they won't let you try to build a small company, right? They want to, you want to know, do you have a shot of being the size of Airbnb or Reddit or Dropbox, making that level of impact? So, and you have those folks now are sort of, your fellow YC founders set that bar so high in terms of how much impact their companies have had on a society that you're then drawn to try to perform at that super high level. So I would say those are kind of the big culture things that I think are good about it.
You're talking about setting the bar, but does every company have to become as big as Airbnb in general? I mean, from a exit point of view for VC funds and Y Combinator in general, they do want people to become unicorns, decacorns, things like that. But from a founder point of view, do you think every company should scale that much?
No, I don't. I don't think every company should scale that much. I think, different people approach entrepreneurship differently. I personally think that building a company is one lever, one mechanism by which you can have impact on the world. And that in some ways it is the fastest way that you can do it. In a lot of ways, it is the best vehicle for having that impact at large scale. So to kind of maximize the impact that you want to have in the world. And, different solutions and technologies will have variable financial returns. And I actually think that's not something that was very important in our thoughts in our founding. We really focused on what was the problem that we wanted to solve. But I will say that when you want to build a company in the venture ecosystem, you then have to think about how what you're doing aligns with the ecosystem. So in that case, when you're building the company, what ends up happening is that you need capital to build the company.
Yeah.
And the way that you can access capital to build a company is if there is going to be the chance of that 50x, 100x return on the investment, which means that you almost need to aim to be the size of an Airbnb or a Dropbox in order to get to where you want to go. And not everyone, of course, not everyone's going to get to that size, but you almost need to aim at it in order to be able to move through the cycles of venture capital and building a company. I think it's hard to even raise money if you're shooting lower, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sure does. I think I have the same point of view, but yeah, I can totally understand why VC funds and accelerators want company to scale that much. And I think it's a good thing. Yeah, awesome. So I think we talked a lot about why Combinator. It was an incredible thing. But let's switch to healthcare in general. I want to talk about the field that you guys are in. So healthcare, I think, is progressing very fast, and I think we are seeing a lot of changes in it. Where does it stand now? Like where is the healthcare industry now? It's
a great question. I can't speak for the healthcare industry as a whole. I look a lot at what the problems are in front of individual clinicians. And I think there's a tremendous amount of burnout amongst clinicians and a huge amount of documentation burden and a growing mass of clinical evidence that they need to sift through. So a lot of what we kind of think about at class is kind of getting into that driver's seat of being the clinician and what are the various problems that you work through. So I think our thinking is very on the ground there. And I think this state right now for most clinicians is pretty rough. You don't have great tools to help you take care of patients at a really high level or to get your work done in a really robust way. And actually, I think that a lot of technology innovation goes to other sectors like finance and crypto and aviation or aerospace, right? Before it arrives at healthcare, which it doesn't make good sense because I think providing healthcare is one of the most important things we do in our society. So you would want your doctors to have the cutting edge technology, but a lot of times that's not where the technology, effort and energy inside of our economies or inside our societies is going. So, in my opinion, we need a lot more dedicated focus and a lot more resources thinking about what the clinician's experience is, a lot more thinking about what are the tools that are available to all providers and health systems. And then also we need to think very much about our systems of how we provide and pay for healthcare in our society. So I think we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. So you mentioned that healthcare is they invest it's kind of at the bottom end of the funnel from what we see from in the major countries in the world, the bigger countries. And the same thing is with education. So I think education and healthcare build the basis for most of the countries. Why do you think is that both of these sectors, I'll talk about healthcare specifically, is so underinvested in by the governments?
We're getting into territory where is not my expertise or that I would do, quite a bit of speculation. I think in sticking specifically in my experience at the U.S. in the U.S. why there is less innovation in healthcare. I think there's one part of it which is that it is hard to build in healthcare because there's a lot of regulation. But I think a lot of the regulation that's there is there for good reason. I think we can and should support people who want to innovate in this space much better than we do, and make it much easier for folks who have new ideas and want to start new companies to get those companies off the ground, to test those ideas. And so we have to find a balance there. And then I think, the reality is that I think it is hard to make money in healthcare because providing healthcare is expensive. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think we have to decide as a society how we want to fund both providing healthcare, but also technology innovation in healthcare. And I think there are a lot of different ways to do it. But I think partly because we haven't figured that out, there's not a system that kind of feeds continuous great innovation into the space.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it was a very broad question in general, so I did not expect a narrow, specific answer. But yeah, that was a great answer. But so you mentioned approval from the government, which of course is for good reasons. You can't build things which are very sensitive in some way. So I want to talk about when you guys are building this tool, which basically is like acting like an assistant for diagnostics for people who diagnose diseases. How does approval correlate with that? I want to know a little bit about how much of your company is built on top of approvals.
So for us, it's very little because we really build a clinical reference tool, sort of like a textbook. You can imagine a sort of like a medical textbook, but one that has an AI interface on top of it. So when we talk about our product is not intended to replace the clinician's judgment. It's intended to be another resource for a clinician to use while they are doing their work. And we kind of tell clinicians that what you want to do is to supervise our AI assistant, our AI tools, in a way you would supervise a medical student or a resident, right? So it's really perfectly acceptable if you're on rounds in a hospital to ask a medical student, "Hi, what do you think about this case? What do you think could be possible diagnoses?" They might say an answer which is not the right answer, but they might also say something that's really helpful and helps you think about things in a new way. You might have a resident admit a patient and treat a patient even, and then come back and review some of that work and go, actually, I would have a slightly different plan and add and edit their plan. So this process of supervising a quote unquote assistant is something we do in medicine a lot, right? We have medical students, we have residents, we have physician assistants, we have people at different levels of training. So introducing assistants into the world of medicine is something that's actually quite easy compared with other places. So where you start to get in trouble is if people think they want to replace the doctor completely with ChatGPT, right? Then you've got a large language model application that's patient facing, and you have to we're not there right now. So essentially, by being a clinical reference tool, by being something that assists the doctor, by being something that can add information to their process but not replace it, we're not in the category of company that needs to be regulated in that way. We're much more like a medical textbook.
Awesome. Yeah, that was an incredible point. I think we'll take a hard stop here. I think you're running out of time, but I'll just ask one last question. It'll broadly cover what you guys how to build a healthcare product. So how are you guys building it from practical standpoint? How are you guys building Glass Health?
So I think the biggest thing that is different about Glass than other companies who are in the space is that we think that when you get a large language model output, you want that output to be based off of human validated, evidence-based, peer-reviewed clinical guidelines. So actually the magic of what we do at Glass is have clinicians create guidelines that large language models can interact with, and further fine-tune those models' abilities to interact with human-validated guidelines. So what that helps is that when you're talking to ChatGPT, it's generating text probabilistically, and so it's not referencing great clinical evidence. So you can't have as much confidence that what you have in front of you is completely accurate. So I think by connecting large language models with human validated clinical evidence and having physicians get involved with training models and fine-tuning models, I think that is the big difference between what we're doing and what others are doing.
Yeah, I absolutely. I totally agree with it. Is this wrapper based on GPT 3.5 or 4?
So it uses the GPT-4. We use GPT-4 API in different places. We've used different models at different times, and I think probably what will happen is that we'll move towards in-house, either fine-tuning models in-house or kind of creating them from scratch. I think it all depends on kind of where the edge is on the performance. And right now, I think GPT-4 is incredibly impressive at its abilities, and it fits our use case very well.
Yeah, I think because a lot of investors don't invest in wrappers around GPT-4 or Palm, which was made by Google, or Llama, those things. So did you guys face any problem with that?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think you don't want to build a wrapper around the basic functionality of the foundational models. I can definitely see why people will get into trouble there. Our situation is really different. I think you can use the models to build applications, and in our situation, we use a model to do retrieval augmented generation, and we're able to produce something new, which is sort of a differential diagnosis or clinical plan output using our data. And so I think combining, custom or in-house created data sets with the models is actually a great use of the technology. The reality is, this is an inflection moment like the computer coming online, or like the internet, or like the app store, right? And so a new technology comes on, and now there's the potential for many different companies to be built. So the question is not, can every company in the AI space become a foundational model company? That's actually not the way these things work. It is, there are new application layer companies that can build on top of those foundational model companies. I think if you're a VC and you want to invest in, a huge AI company, you might be out there looking for new foundational model companies instead of application, right? You might be searching for, essentially you're searching for the companies building the App Store or building the iPhone, not searching for the companies building applications for it, right? But I would actually argue that you look at how things play out, and the companies building applications, Uber, Instagram, Airbnb, because of that new platform moment, were tremendously successful. And they didn't have some huge new technology, right? There's not some huge new technology behind Airbnb or Instagram, right? Or any of the social media, in the social media era, or in the mobile app era. It wasn't some huge new technology. There was a platform that you could build new companies using. And so I think this is very similar, where not every company that's using GPT-4 has to have a massive new AI insight or technology shift in order to build a company that makes something people really want and provides a tremendous amount of value in the world. So overall, I think some people are worried about that. We generally are not very worried about it.
I love the last point. I think a lot of people think about building wrappers and investors tell them not to. And yeah, that was the best take on this topic about wrappers that I've heard till date. So yeah, I think we'll take a hard stop here. I think I enjoyed it a lot, and that's it from my side. Anything you'd like to say?
No, thanks for having me. I think it's a great show.